Good afternoon. My name is Rich Nass, and I am the brand director for the Embedded Group here at Open Systems Media. I'm here for today's 5-minute interview with George Hermanski of Verocell. He's the CEO of the company, and he focuses on software safety and certification in the transportation industries, which includes avionics, automotive, and things like that. How are you doing today, George?
I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So we have 5 minutes, so I want to get right into these questions. So you and I had a chat a little while ago, and we were talking about how the industry is moving a little bit too hastily in the automotive and unmanned vehicle applications without waiting for the standards and, more importantly, the safety part of that, those bodies to act. What is your opinion on this?
Well, let's look at two sectors I'd like to cover today. One of them is unmanned air systems or unmanned vehicles, commonly known as drones. The press is describing lots of different attempts in putting UASs into the national airspace. And in my opinion, I think they're moving too hastily. I know the FAA is working hard to come up with regulations because right now the regulations are lacking. You know, even now, last week, there was a report to Congress where one of the Delta pilots reckoned that there are over 150 close encounters with unmanned vehicles per month. And that will only get worse. Industry, regulators, and academia are working on new guidance. And under RTCA, they are producing new standards which will come into force sometime in the future. For example, one of the things they focus on is sense and avoid, and the other one is how to keep vehicles well clear of each other. But this is still work in progress. Many of the large UASs have lots of experience in the military settings, but their software hasn't been formally approved under the FAA rules, such as DO1 guidance, such as DO178. And what concerns me is if we move too hastily and there's a big accident with a big aircraft, and civilians, then it might set the industry back 5 or 10 years while we focus and work out how to do it better. In the automotive industry, we have standards, but the standards are not formally adopted and not formally enforced. For example, there is a standard called ISO 26262, which is an international safety standard for software in the automotive sector. But there's no regulation that calls this out, unlike in the avionics sector, for example. There is a DOT site, which Department of Transportation site, which lists various problems and accidents. And what was interesting is if you look at the accidents, for example, with the Toyota incidents, what we found there was that the requirement for Toyota to report was there, but they only needed to report the emission problems. So we have two main regulations. One is the safety of crash test dummies, and the other one is emission control. So they had to report the fact that their automobiles went out of emission regulations in over-acceleration conditions, and of course they said they would fix the emission problem by fixing the over-acceleration condition. But there was no legal requirement for them to go back in there and report that they had a software safety problem. With cars getting so much more complex and software driving that sort of complexity, again, it'll set the industry back 5 or 10 years if we discover that cars are killing people through software failures. So that's something that needs to be addressed, mainly making sure that the standards are really enforced.
Okay, now in both of those examples, avionics and automotive, you mentioned the FAA and the DoD. Your putting the onus on the government. Is that really who should be regulating these things?
Right now, on the FAA side, the FAA mandate the manufacturers to make sure that the aircraft are safe. On the automotive sector, they don't do that yet. And right now, it's the manufacturers are self-policing themselves. And I think there should be government regulations which say, there's a safety standard, follow it.
But should those safety regulations come from industry and then get approved by the government, or should the government be setting the standards themselves? What's the real process? I hate to get it bogged down in government forever.
Usually what happens is that the industry comes up with a standard, and it's a collaborative effort between industry and academia and the regulators, and then together they develop a standard. And once a standard is developed, then government should say, make sure you use that standard. And that's what happens in the railway industries, and that's what happens in the aviation industry. That hasn't happened in the automotive industry yet.
Interesting. Okay, we're almost out of time. We're up to about our 5 minutes, but I know you had a very strong opinion on the analysis of the Toyota recall. I was wondering if you just take a minute to discuss that.
So, again, the Toyota recall was never actually, it was reported by Toyota to the government. It was reported as an emission problem. And they say it's an emission problem that happens in over-acceleration conditions. And the letter's there in public record. And if there was an over-acceleration problem, and over-acceleration, uncommanded over-acceleration is a safety issue, it should have been also reported as a safety problem. But it wasn't. It didn't need to be. And my view is it should be, or should have been, very prominent and admitted by Toyota that it was a over-acceleration problem, was a safety issue, as well as an emission violation.
Very good. I'm sure we could really take this a lot further, but we are up against our 5-minute window, and I really appreciate you taking the time, George. That was George Romanski of Verocell. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you, Rich.